What do paper bags, séances, Hamlet, and the Brooklyn Bridge have in common? I am stressed out. Another episode of The Gilded Age. Hey everyone, this is D, Movie Man, fellow cinephile, popcorn addict, and emerging film critic, coming to you with reliable recaps, reviews, and reactions. And today I'm coming to you all once again with another episode of The Gilded Age, Season 3, Episode 4, Marriage is a Gamble. This episode was directed by Michael Engler and written by Julian Fellows and Sonia Warfield. So you guys already know how I structure things, so this time around we are going to start with Peggy and Co. over in Newport. We see that Peggy and Dr. Kirkland are continuing their mini courtship, which currently includes a visit to his parents' home. And naturally, she's willing to offer her feedback and perspective regarding Peggy's outlook on politics, including suffrage. In Elizabeth's opinion, the goal of being a great wife and mother was always the biggest aspiration, but it appears that nowadays, young women just aren't interested in that anymore. Peggy makes it clear that she can care about both at the same time, and it appears that Dr. Kirkland is in agreement with that. A short while later, we see Peggy giving her speech to the Newport attendees, which includes black as well as white residents. Discrimination in lawmaking becomes a key theme in her speech, and she's emphasizing the attempts to undermine all the rights and benefits that Reconstruction brought forth. Meanwhile, we see none other than Aurora, who has popped up at the event to support Peggy. Considering that she's now officially relocated to Newport following this whole fallout with Charles, when Peggy asks how she's doing, she mentions that she's holding it together, but obviously still feeling the sting of it all. She is also introduced to Peggy's mother and cousin, and she remarks to Dorothy how proud of her daughter she must be before she departs with a note of sadness in her voice. However, the general success of Peggy's talk is marred when Elizabeth decides to make a very loaded statement about Peggy's father, saying he is not an important man like us, considering that his background separates him from their social group. Dorothy makes it very clear that her husband is an honorable man, a business owner, and a very proud husband and father. Frederick clearly does not share his wife's sentiments, and he reminds her that Newport is not the center of everyone's world. However, between the direct jab at her father's status and the not-so-subliminal questioning of the subject matter in her speech, Peggy quickly picks up on the condescension and elitism that Peggy realizes caused her parents' recent argument. And I did want to mention one last thing before I close out this part of the recap. Quick shout out to Razoo, which is, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, but this is someone who commented on the last recap and left this comment regarding Phylicia Rashad and her role as the Dean of the College of Fine Arts at Howard University. I knew she was the Dean, of Fine Arts, but I didn't realize it was Howard. And then she also referenced the paper bag test regarding Howard and then other universities. And the paper bag test is something I wanted to mention, but trying to condense, it's a struggle. But I did want to say that the paper bag test was a very real thing, especially throughout throughout the whatever century, but it's really still a thing today. It's just not an actual bag. No one just goes and says this. It's just inherent. It's buried, unfortunately. But yeah, it would be a situation where basically, if you're not at least the color of a paper bag or lighter, then it's a no for us. You're not admitted. You're not coming in. Find somewhere else to go because it ain't going to be here. We're talking about churches, fraternities, sororities, Jack and Jill of America, Harlem's Cotton Club. I mean, the list goes on. And honestly, it's not surprising, but it is upsetting. And I say that because that whole system, that whole mindset, all of that is rooted in anti-blackness. And that's not something that was ever ours to begin with. That is something that was placed upon us by the power structure, and society and the people in power. And I think you already know what I mean when I say that. let's be honest, these standards were something created by a white dominated society, and that's just the reality. But then to take that, the exclusion, the prejudice, the colorism, all the things wrapped up into those experiences, and then it seeps into our community, it infects our community, it divides our community, when really it should be the thing that's strengthening us. It should bring forth unity, but it's like we all fell for the banana in the tailpipe. We got caught in the trap, and here we are now. I know there are ways to move forward, especially by acknowledging it, to being aware of it, but it's just like the fact that we internalize and weaponize those same things that were done to us. It's just like, it honestly blows my mind. But shout out to Razu for bringing that up, because that was a point I wanted to make, and it was definitely something I had to at least mention before I moved on. Now, jumping over to the Van Rhijn/Brook household, we see that the battle of the budget is continuing with Agnes and Ada, especially now that Ada is covering all the bills, which also includes Agnes's recent dress fitting for the impending wedding. Afterwards, we see Agnes heading to a charity committee meeting, which gives Ada the opportunity to seek out and have a session or official séance with Madame Dashkova. Unfortunately, her cover gets blown when Agnes returns home early due to changes in her financial role, which naturally is because of Ada, who is now paying the subscription and, of course, is listed as an official member. And of course, Ada's attempt to explain Madame Dashkova goes nowhere, and Agnes is not here for the scam. She is accusing Madame Dashkova of preying on grieving women like Ada, and she quickly dismisses her from the home. However, Madame Dashkova does leave her card for Ada before she leaves and lets her know that her husband has more to say, which means that this situation is far from over. Childish falderall like this is something that Agnes has no patience for, but Ada does stand firm and declares that there are more things in heaven and earth, Agnes, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Shout out to William Shakespeare's Hamlet. Thankfully, Agnes does appear to be on better terms with Marian, as we see them having a very lighthearted conversation about Marian's participation as a bridesmaid in the wedding. And since Agnes's eyes do open and she can see through them, she also is wondering if Marian's inclusion in the wedding might be a setup for something bigger down the road. She's not wrong, but whenever I think of Bertha, I'm just like, it's just too easy. We also find out that John's seed money is taking root, as Oscar now has 12 clients. Moving on. Downstairs, we see that the staff is all abuzz with curiosity over Jack and the fact that he now has a second meeting with the clock manufacturer. Jack is pretty much speechless when he learns that the manufacturers want to buy the clock and the patent. And as they continue to negotiate, Larry just kind of takes control. He's like, throws out this number. Throws out this number. And they're like, okay, we can't go higher than this. And Larry's like, I think you can. So eventually, it is purchased for none other than $600,000, which, adjusted for inflation, would be close to $20 million. And with Larry and Jack splitting the profits, that leaves Jack with a nice hunk of change, and he's not really sure what to do now. It's like, he was prepared to continue to work on this invention and go through this whole process of, of refining it and, testing it, all that stuff. And now it's just like, no, I've just been given a bunch of money. What now? Listen, that's a problem I wouldn't mind having. I'm not gonna lie. But I do understand it's just kind of like what's the first step? You know what I'm saying? But believe me, I would find a way. I really would. Later that night, we see Jack confessing the truth to Mrs. Bauer, And, you know, she's very encouraging, of course. That's Mrs. Bauer. That's just how she is. And she's saying, like, oh, if you got paid, you know, it's fine. And that's okay, you know, and you can keep that to yourself. And, you know, she's kind of thinking like, oh, okay, well, you got paid. You should be proud. That's okay. And then he mentions that he's $300,000 richer. And when I tell you, she dropped, I don't know if it was a bowl, but she dropped that thing. It shatters. And she was just like, whoa, because that still puts him at just short of $10 million. So yeah, she was not prepared for that number. But when she realizes Jack's hesitation is regarding him having found a home and not wanting to walk away and lose that, Mrs. Bauer obviously does understand that. And she says, okay, you know, this is our secret. And I'm happy about that, but that's scary. To be sitting on that much money, I'm just like, ooh, what's going to go wrong? I don't like it, but I feel it coming. And finally, jumping back over to the beginning of the episode, we see that the Russell household is all abuzz for the impending wedding of Gladys to the Duke. As always, Bertha is taking charge and directing the staff. You know, she has a whole force in place to get everything together. But unfortunately, Gladys is isolated in her room and she is refusing to come out for obvious reasons. And in relation to Marian, we see that Larry was the one who floated the initial question because one of the other women, Miss Jerome, was out sick. And of course, Bertha is hesitating because she's not sure if Marian is important enough. And George is like, look, must you go to the stake for everything? Like, let it go. We also discover that there have been these very strange leaks to the press about Gladys, her wedding attire, at one point her undergarments, and everyone is very concerned, including Bertha. Interestingly enough, Adelheid is strongly suggesting that someone on the dressmaker's team is at fault, but I'm just kind of wondering, how do you know this? Despite Bertha's objections, we eventually see her sister Monica arriving. She's very down to earth. She's very practical as far as her packing. You know, she has one single evening dress that obviously Bertha does not care for. Bertha is just not prepared to be around her sister. And her styling, her lack of clothing options, lack of clothing changes, she's not feeling it. But Monica pushes back and lets her know, like, look, I don't need all the extra. I got my one dress. That's going to do for me. At this point, Bertha is already irritated, but then Monica and her bold and brash manner of addressing the Duke and his family at the dinner, she's pulling at the last threads of Bertha's patience. What else can she do? Now, let me say, regarding this next moment, I didn't think anything of it at first because I assumed that this was just going to be another example of Monica embarrassing herself in front of Bertha and her guests because, you know, she goes to drink the coffee and then it spills all over her. And I was thinking, oh, okay, well, I mean, you know, another reason for Bertha to be embarrassed. Then, once Church said, I have no idea how that could have broken, I was like, oh, got it. I see what's going on here. The veil has been lifted. I was like, no, absolutely not. In a hilariously and disrespectfully petty move, Bertha has basically set up the coffee spill to ruin the dress because it's Monica's only one, thus forcing her to wear something far more luxurious and presentable for the wedding. I'm just like, there are no words. We also see the Duke's sister, aka Lady Sarah, at the dinner as well, and let's just say she doesn't have the warmest personality in the world. Later, of course, George has another discussion with Bertha about the way she has pushed Gladys into this situation, and he says again, he would have been fine with their daughter marrying a wealthy banker because if it's enough for Gladys, then why would his ambitions matter? Exactly. But this is Bertha we're talking about. And she quickly shuts that down and she's like, go to bed, George, and wake up sensible. And let me just say, in the same way that I made a reference to a certain scene involving a certain actress in the episode 1 recap, As soon as she said that, I instantly thought of one thing.
Go to bed!
On the morning of the wedding, despite everything that's going on, George receives unexpected bad news from JP Morgan, who is pulling out of the railroad deal. The recent crises, the whole bank situation, just all the mayhem that's going on in New York, he is not willing to risk his money for George. It seems that George is on the ropes, but he insists on moving forward, and hopefully it appears he might still have some cards left to play. So because Gladys has still been stuck in her room this entire time, the dinner and everything else that has gone on, Bertha finally agrees to let Marian speak with Gladys to try to coax her out. And Marian is reminding Gladys of all the expectations that are being placed on her, in contrast to herself, because no one really cares who she marries. She has no real value and no real significance. And with that being said, she also brings up the contrast between the ill-fated love match of Charlotte Astor and Helen Astor's harmonious, if not coerced, marriage to Rosie Roosevelt. She's basically saying, just because you marry for love doesn't mean that it'll turn out well. And just because you marry for obligation and duty doesn't mean it can't turn out well, which is a fair point. We also see George speaking with Gladys, and he basically leaves everything up to her. He gives her 10 minutes to decide whether she's going to show up or not. And it's looking a little dicey. But then when Adelheid descends with the veil, we know that the choice has now been made. And I will say, obviously I love the design of the wedding dress and all that, but I really love that church had the entire staff cheering for Gladys, because you can see that it was kind of like a release, and she was able to smile and just shake off her nerves and her anxiety. So I thought that was a really great moment. However, a less than great moment is happening at the Astor's home. Given our introduction to her, it's somewhat unsurprising that Charlotte has managed to become the scandal of the day due to rumors that her husband has challenged another man to a duel in Paris. Given her social standing, Mrs. Astor is furious, and she demands that Charlotte stay home to avoid overshadowing the wedding. She's like, I may not like Bertha, I may not like Mrs. Russell, but even I am not going to disrespect her by bringing you along. Charlotte finds this very ironic, considering her own mother's sham of a marriage. A cold, loveless existence that keeps Mr. Astor aboard yachts with young, beautiful women, and Mrs. Astor isolated in her drafty old palace. Unfortunately for Mrs. Astor, her daughter's absence does not prevent her from having to endure the constant whispers throughout the church. We also discover that regarding the burgeoning courtship between Mrs. Bruce and Borden, there has been an unexpected development. Considering that we found out in a recent episode that Borden's wife passed away, it seems that he is now more than ready to marry her. I was definitely expecting him to say, I love you. I thought that was going to be the big step, but no, the man knows what he wants, and here we are. Well, Mrs. Bruce makes it clear that she cannot marry him because she is already married. As it turns out, her husband has acute melancholia and has been institutionalized for several years. And since the only legal justification for divorce in New York is adultery, she is not in a position to divorce him, and what's more, she couldn't afford it anyway. We also see the brief return of Mrs. Bitterton, Mrs. Winterton, Freudian slip, and she has sought out Mr. McAllister alongside Mrs. Fish. Basically, she's wanting him to spill the teacup, so to speak, regarding the outcome of the duel. And here's where scripted history becomes real-life history. In reality, Charlotte's husband, J. Coleman Drayton, did issue a challenge to Hallett Alsop Barrow because the man was rumored to be having an affair with Charlotte. However, no such duel ever occurred because friends were there to prevent it from actually happening. And in keeping with that, we see Mr. McAllister confirming that no duel actually took place. However, something that is not mentioned in this scene is the fact that Barrow did fight a duel with Edward Fox. who is none other than the man who is responsible for starting the rumors in the first place. Thankfully, the only real damage that was done was to the man's coat. But as far as the whole gossip and everyone running with the story, same thing happens today. And when I look at YouTube, when I look at social media, when I look at a lot of things, media as a whole, I am always reminded that people do not care about the facts. They care about sensationalism and the drama. After all, the easiest thing for people to do is react, not research.
Message!
When Gladys finally arrives at the church, her eyes are filled with tears. This may technically be a happy occasion, but for Gladys, the church is in mourning. This is the Gilded Age, which means that Gladys is walking into a gilded cage. As she walks down the aisle, we see that Larry and Monica look downcast. George looks defeated. And Bertha, of course, is crying tears of joy. And she finally says the magic words that seal her fate, "I will." And imagine my surprise when we immediately jump over to their ship heading to England. I was like, ooh, no reception, I see. Okay, they said that budget, we gotta keep it tight. I mean, ultimately, like, the most important thing is that it happened, you know, but yeah, I know they couldn't afford that reception. That would have been so much going on. So it probably was expensive enough just doing the wedding scene itself. So, but I was caught off guard. I was like, oh, okay, sure. We see Adelheid assisting Gladys as she will be training her replacement in England. And before she leaves, she has to remind herself to refer to Gladys as Her Grace. However, the Duke, aka Hector, makes his way in, and Lord, we have to have a conversation about consummation.
Okay, I think I speak for everyone when I say, ew.
I mean, it's the reality, but good gracious, like, this was so painful to watch. And, you know, he's not being aggressive. He's not, you know, he's being very patient and understanding and just straightforward. But he also makes it clear that he doesn't want to wait. He just wants to get it over with. And I'm just like, ooh, just the thought, like, And it's not even about the Duke. It's just it's about the fact that you as a person, I know nothing about you. I don't like you. I definitely don't love you. And then I have to lay down with you and do the most intimate of acts just because, like, we're now married to each other. It's just, eek. Ooh, no. Yikes. You can tell Gladys is not prepared for this, but there's nothing else to be done. As she and the Duke move towards the bed, we see the ship passing the city as the Brooklyn Bridge fades in the distance. And what's wild is, a year earlier, we saw the Brooklyn Bridge opening and Gladys and everyone else celebrating and being excited because it felt like a promise of new things to come, a monument to progress, you know, to what might be awaiting in the future, like what might be coming up next. And now as we see the Brooklyn Bridge in the distance through the porthole, as Gladys is now sailing towards a future she did not ask for nor choose, it feels like a goodbye. A silent witness to the city, the life, and the version of Gladys that she is now leaving behind. Well, Bertha, of course, got exactly what she wanted. But something tells me, whether she knows it or not, that she's about to lose something very, very precious. And that closes out episode 4, Marriage is a Gamble. This was a whole lot. Like I said, I was stressed out. I was through. I was tired. I couldn't take it. Good gracious. I'm just like, man, this show just keeps on. Like, this has been a great season. And, you know, I've enjoyed all the seasons, but just seeing the progression, just seeing all the stuff that's going on this season especially, woo, it is a yes for me. And if you couldn't already tell, I obviously had to show up and show out for the city since Gladys is leaving. So I was like, well, I can at least represent this way. But yeah, I don't even have the words. I'm ready to see the consequences because Bertha is about to get it. George, I think he done already played himself because good gracious, what is this? I understand you were trying to support, but you still fell for the okie doke anyway. Like Larry, Marian, it's not over. It's not over. Bertha's gonna suffer some kind of consequence, and I'm not gonna be mad when it happens because, ma'am, rich and wealthy pimping is still pimping. And they say pimping ain't easy, but I can't tell. But as always, please feel free to drop down below and let me know your thoughts on this episode and the recap as a whole. What do you guys think is going to happen with Gladys? I'm thinking there might be a little light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe it's not going to be exactly what we think. It's going to be awkward and weird, and then maybe it gets better. I'm trying to have hope because I feel bad for Gladys. It's possible, but I just don't know. But yeah, let me know what you guys think and drop down below because yeah, there's a whole lot to talk about. So, once again, this is D, Movie Man, signing off, and I'll see you at the movie.